I'm Juliana Valente. Thank you for welcoming me on HGTV's Lanai Hour.
This month, Juliana and I will be discussing how to renovate your colonial-era mansion on a budget. Oh my god. Okay, so...
Have my lemon zinger tea.
Your lemon zinger tea and your Christmas mug. And my NPR plug. Ooh la la.
Why are we in our pajamas?
Because this is a nice casual episode of Strange Deer. Hi guys, it's Kay.
Juliana.
And this is our In Conversation with the cast of 1776, and we had so much fun.
We did.
Oh my god, it was great. And the airplanes are flying over because my house in Hackensack is right on top of Teterboro Airport. We are in my lovely backyard today.
It is lovely.
Oh my god.
So nice.
No, but to the point of this episode, like we actually had the whole cast over here yesterday for our social, our congressional social, and
it was right here.
It's actually warmer and nicer here today than it was yesterday, which is why you're going to see we suddenly move inside. I did all of my lovely ambient shots of everybody, which you've probably just seen if I did my intro the way I'm planning to edit it. But then suddenly we're indoors. But that's why we're also doing this as a wrapper. We're like, we're talking here now the morning after, and we're going to do a little...
I thought it was going to be my hip-hop dreams, imagine.
No, that's Hamilton, 1776. Okay. I don't know how much of the script you've read of our show yet, but there's...
Rapper with a W.
John doesn't rap much.
Oh, no.
Much. Ever. But yeah, so we're going to be bringing you guys a couple different segments that we filmed with our cast, kind of talking about the historical backstory of the show. I'm particularly excited for us to show you guys the chunk where we just sort of riffed on why it matters to have a female cast of the show, and I was especially happy to have like Kelly Wenz, who plays my wife Martha. I thought she brought some particularly fun perspective into it, playing a woman in a woman's show. And I'm not going to spoil it because I want you all to watch the rest of this episode. But there was some really great stuff. We had there were like 8 of us representing the actual cast, and then a couple of our creatives, our director Laura,
and our musical director
Sue. So we'll bring you into that right now, and we'll be seeing you guys checking in about halfway through. Why don't we get the camera? Oh, good. Awkward waving. The Queen's wave. All right. We'll slink.
The Tascam is now recording.
Thank you. Thank you, Tascam. We're getting too good at this. And by good, I mean, do we ever feel like we know what we're doing truly? Do you need somewhere for your mug?
More what?
Like somewhere to put your tea.
Oh, no, it's keeping her fine. She's fine right here. Yeah, exactly.
She's fine where she is.
I have to reheat from
yes, okay.
the little Lanai experience.
Yeah, no, so this is pretty cool. We've got our entire, well, not our entire cast of 1776.
Hope not, because we've been playing 4 parts each. We are entirely surrounded by
a large
some of our cast.
A good portion.
We have 25 people in this cast.
Yeah, wow. We have
This is enough room on that stage?
Yeah, no, so we're gonna, we've got, actually that's gonna be part of as we're talking here, kind of how the show's expanded, but hi everybody, and the other camera can't see me, so I'm just gonna talk to this camera right now for our special edition of Strange Deer, where we're sitting down and talking with the all-female cast of 1776, the Women of Congress, and Juliana, how, where do we start here? There's so much to kind of unpack right now.
Well, why don't we introduce what characters
we'll talk around the horn, starting on this end with the person who's just joined us.
I've been called many things.
But no, so everybody introduce yourself and who you're playing in the show.
Okay.
And you can just talk to us, you don't have to talk to the camera.
Okay.
It's conversational.
So I'm doing Robert Livingston.
And who are you?
in real life.
Stacy Block.
Hi, Stacy Block.
I'm very shy. Playing Robert Livingston.
I'm Sue Chandler. I'm the music director of this wonderful production and looking forward to doing it for the third time.
Yes.
I'm Erica Crash, and I am playing John Hancock for the third time.
And I'm Kelly Wenz, and I'm playing Martha Jefferson for the third time.
Hi, wifey.
I'm Betsy Newberry, and I'm playing Joseph Hughes for the second time.
Second time. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Laura Iacometta. I am the director of 1776 Women in Congress. for the third time.
We skipping us?
We'll skip us and go
Yeah.
over here.
Should I speak with you? Directly to you?
Talk to us.
I am Joyce Liebelt, and in this performance I am playing George Reed for the first time, and I played Hughes in my first performance with this wonderful cast.
Back in February. Yeah, so we got a good chunk of, decent chunk of the cast here. You guys know us. I'm Kay Cook and I'm Thomas Jefferson.
I'm Juliana Valente. I play John Adams.
And so yeah, we got a good chunk of the cast here, and we got a bunch of stuff we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
I'm kind of going to be doing. I promise it's not going to be dry and boring. A little bit of the history behind what happens, the stuff that happens just before we all wind up in the room together. And before we get started, though, we want to talk a little bit about this production and kind of the history of that.
Yeah, exactly. We are so fortunate to have with us our amazing director, Laura Iacometta, who is going to tell us a little bit about why she chose this piece as the first production for your company.
Back about 2 years ago, I think, I went to 54 and Below, and there was a stand-up concert version of 15 women doing 1776, and I went with my friend Erin, and I walked out and I said, oh, that is something that I want to do. I only saw 1776 one time because my daughter was a stage manager for it, and I did fall in love with the production. But after seeing this all women's concert version, I didn't want to make the mistake of saying that I could do this better, but I said we can do this differently. And immediately I had certain voices in my head as I was driving home. And because I work in props and set design, I wanted to do a costume stage version of it. And I had this picture in my head of how I wanted it to look. Incidentally, when it went up on stage for the first time, I felt like I could have cried for hours because it was exactly how I wanted it to look. I was a little unsure of sound because I don't read music and I'm not a musical director, but I have a great musical director, and we talked about it. And what I did was I surrounded myself with people who knew what they were doing, and that was the key to doing something first out, was to make sure that all the people around you know what they're doing, and that they're kind about it. You know, they're not looking at you like, oh, you're the one that doesn't read music, I know what I'm doing. So surround yourself with people who love you back, and who are, everybody's careful with each other. You know, so that was the first thing. And I was right about everyone that I cast in this show, how it was going to be perceived and what it was going to sound like. And that was the miracle, is that it was exactly what I wanted it to be and exactly what I wanted it to sound like.
Awesome.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, a lot of us are coming back for our third go-round on this. And what's kind of different about this time around, because when we first did it, Laura, we did it as a concert staging, right?
We did.
We're adding a lot of the book back this time around.
Yeah, because we had the first one, we really had to stretch it out for it to be even about 58 minutes long.
Yeah, when you're just doing music. Yeah.
We almost didn't realize, I didn't realize how short it was. We had eliminated one song, which we've since added. But it was like, come on, stretch it out. These people are paying money for this. You know. And then, as it went on, when we did it the second time, we added more dialogue, mostly to make the songs make more sense, and we added that last song in there. And now this third time around, there's a lot more dialogue to introduce the characters better and to make the songs make more sense. And it's also in preparation of doing the full show.
Heard it here first, next summer. Well, because 1776 is one of those musicals that, while people know the songs, it's kind of infamous for the book, and particularly for the big, almost half-hour scene in Act 1 in which you introduce everybody. And it's very, it's very compelling, but there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of back and forth. And when you're approaching a show that is this huge, evolving it from a concert version where we're just doing the songs to that, you have those steps in the middle to get there. 1776 premiered, and now I'm going to go into the quick backstory of the show itself. 1969 on Broadway. It ran for 2 years. Ironically now, where Hamilton is playing. It's the same theater. And it was adapted for film in 1972, retaining most of the original cast, including William Daniels, Howard Da Silva, Ken Howard, And it's one of those shows that people love. I've discovered when I talk to people, they love the show, but it's a huge undertaking for theater groups to do. And furthermore, I've had many of my friends being like, oh God, with an all-female cast, that's such a cool idea because there's so many great parts in the show, and only 2 women, looking at my dear wife over here. So flipping that dynamic on its head and being like, opening that up for a female cast is just, it's so fantastic. And I love you so much, Laura, for bringing this into the room and making this happen.
Okay, go. Hey, Kate, wake up. Come on, it's time to do the social media plug. Yeah, come on, tell people where they can find us.
Can alert the committees of correspondence, and we'll have Paul Revere ride across the country saying, "Strange dear."
Okay, or you could just tweet at us. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, at Strange Deer.
Hashtag committees of correspondence. Midnight ride.
This is why we can't have nice things.
The thing is, when you're talking about especially historical-based piece, and something that is so seemingly dense with these events, how do you make it personal? It's all about the dramatic conflict in this piece of whether you're going to be reconciling with England or declaring independence. And we kind of take for granted, like people say, 1776 is it shouldn't work because obviously we know what happened, right? We're sitting in that country right now, so what are the stakes? What's the deal here? But it's kind of the process of how you got there and knowing that it wasn't so clear-cut at the time. I mean, in fairness, by the time this show opens May 8th, 1776, and by that point, we were probably closer to a break than we were to reconciling, but there were a lot of, this is treason. As Juliana always says so many times over, you don't undervalue the fact that this is treason, Signing the Declaration put you on a list, let's be clear, to hang. They had a burn book, if you're a Mean Girls fan. England had a burn book. And so it was not to be taken for granted that, it's not that big a deal. It's huge. I'm going to roll us back. We're talking about May of 1776, but really kind of the basis here starts in 1733, which was the first time that England it was sort of a voluntary tax in a way. It was called the Molasses Act. And it imposed a 6 pence per, let me get this exact number here on this. Where are you? Yeah, 6 pence per gallon on your molasses, but it was really poorly enforced, which is to say, technically you're supposed to pay it, but people stepped around it all the time. So England wasn't making a lot of good money off of it. Now, in the interim, we wind up in something called the French and Indian War, here we call it in America, 7 Years' War over in England, they called it. But it doubled England's national debt overnight. So they needed to make up the money. And the colonies were kind of the place they were looking, because first of all, we're a much larger landmass than the home country, so protecting us, in fairness to England, is expensive. Mm-hmm. So what they did is they went, well, nobody's obeying the Molasses Act, so what we're going to do is roll in something called the Sugar Act, which actually cut the tax in half to 3 pence. So, yay. But they were enforcing it a lot stronger now, like you had to pay or else. And this was kind of the beginning of this series of taxes that England was dropping on us. And further, the idea that we didn't really have direct representation in England on this fact. In your American history class, it was no taxation without representation. We all remember that and writing it in our essays and whatnot. But after the Sugar Act came the Stamp Act, and this was where the North really started to get itchy because it imposed fees on every kind of paper good. Your playing cards, your legal documents, and it was anywhere from 1 pence per sheet of paper up to about £10 on your your legal license. So this wasn't small. This was on top of whatever merchants were already making. And it's particularly tough on the North because this is where a lot of the industry was. It's sort of stereotypical here that you're talking about the South having the land and the North having all the industry. But the Stamp Act really was leaning on us hard in the North. Now, the Stamp Act led to one of our first congressional get-togethers. We didn't have all 13 colonies yet, But everybody kind of got together on this to make a statement to England to be like, this is an illegal tax. You can't do this to us. We don't have a say in Parliament on this fact.
Because these weren't taxes that were being imposed in the mother country.
No, exactly. I mean, this was, you're expensive for us to defend, so we need to make up our money somewhere. P.S. We spent a lot of money in the war, so we have a lot of debt. Now, what happened out of the Stamp Act Congress was we got it repealed. The Stamp Act was repealed. Yay. England instead rolled in something called the Declaratory Act because our line to them was, well, you don't have a right to do this, an outside tax on us. And England basically came back and said, we own you, and it's our right to tax you no matter what. So they literally were just declaring, this is us. And then on top of that, they threw on the Townshend Acts. And the Townshend Acts, Juliana's smiling because literally within the first 15 minutes of the show, Adams names all of these things that lead up to the events of the show. But the Townshend Acts were kind of a series of, the upshot of it is there were like 4 or 5 acts, but the bottom line was, now it was a bunch of imports. And the South started getting itchy at this point because we're talking about imports on silk, china, glass, pretty much everything. Now our plantation owners in the South are going, but now us too. And kind of brings everybody to the table at that point. And there's a fun little side note here that I need to throw in. I said it wasn't just going to be me listing off events. Mr. Hancock, so here's a fun piece. Yes. Dear sir, so in 1768, one of your ships gets seized. This is 5 years before the next thing that comes along is the Tea Act. We're not there yet. But your ship, the Liberty, was suddenly seized on suspicion, sir, of smuggling. Don't
worry, I got your back.
Yes, in fact. What's important about what happens with the Liberty and Hancock's ship being seized is because we all think, oh, well, then they threw all the tea in the harbor, and there were things happening before this even happened. So Hancock's ship comes sailing into the harbor, and the import duty guys board the ship, and they take a look in the hold. He's got like 25 bottles of Madeira wine in a ship that should hold over 100. And they're like, what's going on here? Where'd all your stuff go? And they arrested him on suspicion of having basically offloaded the other 75 in the dead of night to avoid paying this import duty. So his buddy John, who, by the way, starts to get an interesting reputation as a lawyer for the fact that he also defends the British soldiers who fire, hyperbole is the Boston Massacre. In truth, it really wasn't a huge massacre, but Adams defended the British soldiers to try to prove to England that you can get a fair trial here in America. But with Hancock's situation in 68, he just kind of knocks on John's door and goes, hey, so there's a thing going on here. Can you get me out of this? Now, the upshot is Hancock probably actually was smuggling, but that's okay. Smuggled in some Madeira wine. Why not?
Having a party.
Yes. So it's May of 1773, and England passes the Tea Act, which kind of was, in their eyes, more of an inventory reduction. They'd worked with the East India Tea Company, and they had warehouses full of tea back home in England. So they ship it to us with the insistence that this is what we're going to sell here in the colonies. And that by itself really is not, I guess it's not a huge deal, but when you look at all the other things that have come before it, it's like, okay, you've been taxing us to pay for your war. Now we're paying a penny for each piece of paper we got. Like, it builds up. And upshot, a bunch, led by Sam Adams, your dear cousin, a bunch of patriots board the ship.
Yeah, great beer.
Good beer. A bunch of patriots board the ship in dead of night and shove the crates of tea overboard. We all remember this from our history class. Dressed as American Indians to disguise their identities, I guess. And it was more, yeah, we could go into a side tangent on that as well, but the bottom line with the Tea Party was it got the port of Boston closed, which is no small thing. Until the tea was paid for, essentially Boston / Massachusetts was shut down. And the rest of the colony, first of all, Massachusetts kind of leads everything as far as rebellion's concerned. They tend to stick their necks out. And you too, you Boston folk. Within the script, it's actually, why is it always Boston who disturbs the king's peace? And you'd think, well, why is Boston such a big deal? It is one of the major harbors in the colonies. Boston and New York are really what we've got for import-export. So closing Boston is no small thing. It's going to severely affect our ability to import. It's going to export as well. We can't do business. And at that point, from the Tea Act, the Tea Party, we call them in our history books the Intolerable Acts. They're referred to as the Coercive Acts. Now, the Intolerable Acts were basically to punish Boston. Sorry. First, they closed the port of Boston. They basically removed any of Massachusetts' independent legislation capability. And also the Quartering Act you may have heard of, which was basically a demand put upon American colonists within Boston and within Massachusetts that British soldiers could basically show up at your front door, knock, and say, "Hey, I need somewhere to stay for the night." Yeah, that was the British soldiers that gave them this. Thank you, Stacey. And you had to let them because the king says so. And they were intolerable as a result because we had no rights on this, and there's a theme here. The coercive acts are important because they lead to the First Continental Congress, where you get a bunch of the people that you recognize: Dickinson, Rutledge, Sherman, Chase, Richard Henry Lee, both Adams were there, Hopkins. Basically, the First Continental Congress was set. The big thing they did was declare we're going to boycott British goods, pull out. We've had enough of this. We're not going to export anything. And they declared that if the coercive acts weren't reversed within 1 year, any and all trade with England was to cease. But they also reached the agreement that if Massachusetts were to be attacked during this time, this is important because it's the first time all the colonies are kind of together on this. If Massachusetts were to be attacked, everyone would be involved. Everyone would work to help our little rabble-rousers up in the north. And then we start to have all the spiral out. Lexington and Concord happens in April of 75, which are the shot heard round the world. You can go down a rabbit hole of who actually fired that first shot, but it matters less than the fact that that's where things began. And yes, it's in Boston, or it's in Massachusetts, no surprise here. The particulars of the battle, what that leads to is it's the start of the revolution for all intents and purposes. By June of 75, we have the Battle of Bunker Hill. And from Bunker Hill, we go into the Second Continental Congress. And that's kind of where 1776 picks up.
The show.
Yeah, the show picks up at that point. And the big push at this point, as you see the show, is do we declare independence? We had just also sent over what's called the Olive Branch Petition, led by Dickinson and the Conservatives, to be like, so I know things are bad, but hey, we'd still love you if you guys are willing to, take us back. Everybody else in the room is like, all the pro-independence folk are like, this is a waste of time. We've already had Bunker Hill. And that was really the king's response. Like, Bunker Hill happened in June. This thing comes July 5th, 75, to the king going, please take us back. And the king's like, there are a bunch of dead people now. Over 1,000 of my soldiers are dead, so we're not listening to you anymore.
But it's important to know that that's what the stakes are about. As we're arguing in Congress, some of the animosity between Adams and Dickinson, these are life and death type choices that they have already made enormous steps toward in their own way. So this isn't just your random congressman fighting over.
Yeah, what's interesting about Dickinson for me, had I Marcia in the room, I would be calling her out right now, is he was more of a moderate for the longest time, and had actually co-authored a paper with Jefferson ahead of all of this happening, and he was also very well known actually for stirring up patriotic sentiment in his letters from a farmer in Pennsylvania. Everybody feels that push and pull, I think, is the idea. It's even the most seemingly patriotic in the room, it's a pause point for you. The more middle colonies, like New York and Delaware and stuff, what's interesting to me about the structure of the show is each one of those has 3 delegates. Now that we have the full cast here with a full cast for this production, because the middle colonies were super split down the middle. You had the simple farmers, and then you had there were some northern plantations, like in the middle area in Pennsylvania, in Delaware. So the dynamics between a north, which is very industrial, and a south, which is kind of the classic land rich, cash poor, because even though you've got acres upon acres of land, those crops don't come in. You're going to be out this year, and maybe you were also out last year. So everybody's got stakes they're bringing to the table, and their direct circumstances are different, but it's not a simple decision for anybody, whether you're in or out.
And families that you have to take care of, which is a beautiful thing about this show, is that it does bring in the wives for Jefferson and John Adams. We get to see their wives, so we do get a little bit of a glimpse that these were actually families that were fighting for their lives and their freedoms. And
in some cases, estates were seized. Like at the end of the show, I believe it's Morris of New York is informed, and in fact, that his estates were burned by the British. I mean, these were, again, this was not a small undertaking for anybody.
So have any of you been cast as men at male roles before?
Don't look at my wife. Haven't.
Trying to think.
No.
I've had parts changed from men to women.
Right.
Or I did Man of La Mancha, and they changed. It was Anselmo, and they made it Anselma.
Okay.
And they made the part very androgynous in the jail.
There's a precedent for doing like all-female Shakespearean pieces. As Laura mentioned before, 1776 was done in concert with an all-female cast. But what is the difference between an all-female cast and this mostly male cast to how an audience might perceive it? Have you heard any feedback or thought about how maybe the audience is reacting to seeing all females?
I can answer one.
Excuse me. I think my friends who reacted were the uniqueness of it all, allowing women to speak,
and the
bringing them to the
it,
forefront in these predominantly male roles. So it was,
and portraying in a time when women did not vote. So here we are playing these founding fathers who are making these incredibly life-altering decisions as women who in 1776 couldn't vote.
right.
So it's pretty significant.
And the songs and the lines are still telling the story. It doesn't matter who is telling the story. It's out there. And then once you see all the women up there, I think I'm not as familiar with the role done the original show that's done all with men, but the story's out. The story's the same. The issues are the same. The words of the songs telling the story, and I think that's why it works. Sometimes when you substitute, I saw a production of Beauty and the Beast for community theater, and they didn't have a LeFou that was male, and they put a woman in there, and I heard comments in the audience that wasn't right. So maybe sometimes it doesn't work, but in this case, I think it really works. Just the nature of the story, the historical story that everybody knows all the facts, and that's why it works.
When I was putting this together, and we were well into rehearsal, and I would hear from friends of mine saying, "I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work," And I said, "Well, come and see." Well, those people didn't come and see it, but one of the things that happened afterwards was. A relative of somebody in the cast went up to her and said, "That was the most powerful thing I have ever seen." And, there was a process going through. The cast had a learning process as well, because I know that we went through this about the makeup and how do we sit and should we have mustaches and
There were mustaches?
one person asked, are we lesbians? And it's like, no, we're not. That's your business. But it really came down to very simple terms, is that we are just phenomenal singers who are singing a score primarily that was written for men. And when you break it down into those basics, it kind of opens the door for a lot of other stuff in the future, because that's really all it is. Is, you know, I can tell you that I spent many a time in my bedroom listening to scores of West Side Story and being able to sing all the parts.
Absolutely.
And that's what it was. And in community theater, you know, we have the audition notices go up, and then 2 days later after auditions are, we need more men.
Yeah.
We need more men.
Always.
So we kind of just bypass that whole thing that we need more men. But I think you were right, Joyce. You touched on something about it being very timely.
Yeah.
Okay, so for us, it was yay. It's a very timely thing, and it was a really good way to promote women in Congress. You know, the other thing is now doing all this exploration of the history of the show. I realized that if there was women in Congress, it would have been maybe a 20-minute show, and we would have
Very well said.
and that would have been the end of that. We're deciding on this, and none of your bullshit. And,
Once you start taxing our sugar, we're
Yeah.
at it.
But the,
tax this, brother.
but the women's songs would have been, if we did it that way, the women's songs would be quite different, because the men could just not handle being home alone with the kids. They would be writing more and more letters.
Yeah.
There's something nice about
Exactly.
having all the estrogen on stage, you know, and it just feels very empowering to be with all women doing this very significant piece, and the timing of it, and it just feels very empowering.
I get that same thing, like when we're on stage. Especially, I don't know what's going on.
She's leaving.
Wake up.
My wife has a thought. My wife has a thought.
We all have the same cycle.
But Erica, finish your thought. Yeah.
No, I was to say that, you know, as we were working on from the first time especially, you know, and especially when we started getting some costumes and we all started to try to become more in character and really understanding a lot more about what we were singing about, what we were doing, I did feel this growing sense of confidence in everybody and camaraderie and, you know, like we were merging as a Congress ourselves as performers, but it also kind of resonated to the historical aspect of it, that we're bonding together here like a band of brothers or whatever, and we're bringing this forward. So, you know, I think it's on the art level, on the history level, it just brings it all together, and to have that community with all of you, and to get to know all these people that, you know, we're all from different places. A lot of us don't know each other, and you know, it's really cool, really cool experience.
Martha, dear, what were you
And
going to
Kelly?
say?
Raise your hand.
So I think as playing one of the female roles in the show,
Yeah.
my friends thought it was very amusing. Of course, you would be like one of the two women that's actually still playing a woman in the show, because I love dresses, so that makes sense. But
You're wearing my dress.
it's true. But it was really interesting sitting there and doing a lot of cross stitching during the show and realizing I realized how irrelevant women were, and. Like, I actually, not that I felt irrelevant in the production, but I... With sitting there listening to everything going, like, this is so amazing that we all get to do this, and we're all leading different lives, and we've all had different training, we all went to school, well, someone went to school for this, and that we get to do this now, and people care about what we're saying, but, you know, at a time, no one did. Yeah. And sitting there, and that was my job, cross-stitching, or just sitting there and being the president's wife, and, like, you're the president, but that no one really cared about those people at that time.
It's been interesting.
That's so sad.
It's been interesting to me because I'm researching Jefferson and finding out about Martha, and who was his first and only wife, because she, on her deathbed, told him to never remarry. She had been through having a stepmother and didn't want that for her children. But the way in which women were regarded in the South in particular, you know, to be a good Southern belle, and the way that you were to entertain, and the women were to retire at a certain point in the evening so the gentlemen could sit and discuss the more weighty matters, and how actually the instruction for women on things like you needed to know how to cross stitch because you needed to remain in the room for a certain amount of time, and you shouldn't be idle, and you couldn't possibly be reading a book or to yawn. You're nodding and smiling because someone's actually Southern over here. But what was valued in a spouse at that point, for instance, someone who you'd think is progressive as Jefferson, who really, while he was fascinated by a woman like Abigail, who was very strong-willed and very, in so many ways ahead of her time in all of her thinking, and her marriage with John was very much of equals, comparing that, because Jefferson was fascinated by her, but also terrified by her. Well, many years later, when they're
was terrified by as well.
This is accurate.
But doesn't that make it so poignant in the show when you added compliments? That moment brought me to tears when all the the saltpeter arrives, and you're just like the impact of all those little women, at home, and the quiet little worker ants, doing what they were asked, and the impact that it had. So that when that came onto stage, when we did it the last time, I got goosebumps and I got tears. I couldn't believe it. When
it was hard for me.
The first time,
I actually it was like biting, like my
yeah.
neck over my head. Like, John Adams cannot cry right now.
I just thought that that moment was, and as a woman, being that little worker ant sometimes, to kind of see it come to fruition like that in such an important way was just amazing.
Well, John Adams, his persona outside of his house was a whole lot different than in his house. She ran that house, and she ran him, and he acquiesced to her all the time, because he would go running home saying, "Look at what they did to me." Man up, you.
They were such an equal partnership in a way that very few marriages were at that time. And like I said, not that there wasn't a respect for Abigail in that way from someone like Jefferson, but in the time it was much more the woman's role to kind of be the entertaining and the side thing, the one you came home to lay your burdens upon and then get back to the heavy matters later on while she keeps the house tidy and is constantly pregnant, by the way. Like they were married for 10 years, which he phrases uncheckered happiness. But like pretty much from day one constantly pregnant, which is probably why she died so young.
Probably.
Among other things. They all did.
I think one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we kept in this show, and part of my vision was, there was a college that did an all-women's version, and they had two men play Abigail and Martha.
Interesting.
And for me, it ended up being a parody in that sense. And so that's something, a lot of people asked me, well, are you going to have the two men sing that? I said, no. And I know working with you, when we talked about this characterization and working with Vivian, was that I wanted that love to be real. I wanted you guys to convey that love for each other and to have it meaning, and it comes through so well.
It's palpable. Yep.
In your demeanor, both yours and Vivian, and also the way you sing it. And I think that you probably had the hardest time vocally in where you had to be, because Vivian and Juliana are both high sopranos. Okay, so the one thing I didn't want, and you've heard me say it a million times, I didn't want dueling sopranos singing this role. So I think out of, when we got the group together and we say, just find where you're comfortable in the chord, just find where you're comfortable, and we all found where we're comfortable, but you and Vivian, you especially, had to work hard to make that opposition in your vocals, and that's one of the things that gets me every time.
And the harmony.
Every time.
The harmony is so beautiful.
Yeah. And the stuff that you did on your own, with the harmonies with Sue, working with Sue, and that was the thing. It's the most beautiful thing that happens, and musically this show is magnificent, and not a male voice to be heard.
And it's also a contrast, because you're such a blowhard in Congress, and you're such a, that really hard edges, and then as soon as you're with Abigail, all of those edges
That's the most
soften.
fun part to play, like actor-wise.
Yeah. And that's
Who he
the
becomes
thing
around
that
her.
makes sense about your characters, where you're not, because we don't have a whole lot of staging and stuff like that to see those two together. But you're right, it does work vocally to see how vulnerable you are, and that's a big testament to your vocal ability.
I just want to say I'm having a ball. You guys can cut this out when you do your.
Oh no! Whenever we say, here's a rule on Stranger. Whenever Kay says she's cutting something, it stays in.
Always.
Because I am not. I am not an actor. I'm not. I'm really, and I'm not saying this so you'll say, "Oh, go on." I am not of this caliber, and I admit it because I'm. It's the truth. But I have felt so immersed in it, and so a part of it, and so embraced by it, that I will do it every single time. And I sit on that stage in my own little quantity, not quality. And if I could, I would sit like this every time somebody else was singing, because that's my feeling about the talent that is, involved in this show.
I get so excited when I know we're coming up on more performances because I just love this group, and I love again the intersectionality because we all work at these different groups in various places around New Jersey, and Laura's really just brought together kind of from our very first interview. You sat down and you're like, I got them all. You don't have to go to 10 theaters to see all these voices. I got them right here.
Well, the thing that happened is, outside of maybe 3 people, I've worked with everybody, and so I've heard everybody. And when I walked out of the Studio 54 and was driving home, I texted Vivian and I said, "Just you two, Abigail, for me, please." Okay, she got back to me in about 15 seconds and said, "I'm in." The other voice I heard in my head was Kelly's from Martha. When I heard that song, that was the voice I couldn't get out of my head. And you and I had just finished working together, so it was already kind of like that work in progress. And then you telling me it was a role that you've always wanted to do, and it went from there, So I've been blessed because I've worked with everybody, and I know what the capabilities are, and I'm not disappointed in any way about anything that has happened here, and especially what this group is now, what it's become and what we're planning to do.
I've got a fun way for us to wrap this up. It is time for the interactive portion of our evening, not that this hasn't been. We're going to play a little congressional quiz. I've got some trivia. It's multiple choice. It's multiple choice. So it's
Alexander Hamilton. No.
There will be no Hamilton in this room.
Be talking about Hamilton.
Jefferson and Adams will not have Hamilton in this room. No, it's just a little bit of fun. It's a little multiple choice, and whoever guesses the most. I think what I'm going to do is go around the horn and have everybody pick an answer, and then just keep track of your own point system. I have no score. All right. So, question number 1. This member of the Continental Congress famously said of John Adams, "He means well for his country, is always an honest man, often a wise one, but sometimes, and in some things, absolutely out of his senses." Was that said by John Dickinson, John Hancock, Ben Franklin, or Roger Sherman?
Oh boy.
Ben Franklin?
Should we do it by
Yeah.
hands?
Okay, who
how
votes
many
for Dickinson? That feels lovely. Who votes for Hancock? Okay. Who votes for Ben Franklin?
That sounds like Franklin.
Just because everybody else.
Is that how democracy happens?
Yes.
Anybody for Roger Sherman? Okay, if you said Franklin, you're right, and it's one of my favorite quotes. All right, so question number 2. This member of the Continental Congress was reportedly dismayed that George Washington was chosen to lead the Continental Army instead of him. Was that A. John Adams, B. Richard Henry Lee, C. Colonel Thomas McKean, or D. John Hancock? So who votes for John Adams? Richard Henry Lee?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
Lee. Going out for my grades in
So we
history.
get 2 votes now.
Who votes for McKean?
Oh, right.
And who votes for John Hancock? It was Hancock.
Ooh.
Hancock.
And I did that on my own.
That time I didn't need to follow the crowd. That time I guessed it all by myself. on the honor system here, guys. Hancock
Scottish guy.
allegedly the Hancock family actually says no, he didn't have that ambition. He was just a businessman. He didn't. I think the truth probably lays somewhere in the middle. I think Hancock may have had that little bit of ambition in him, but then once he saw what Washington was dealing with, I imagine you sitting there going, "Oh, thank God I dodged that bullet," literally and figuratively. All right, so question number 3: this member of the Continental Congress wrote some of his early newspaper essays under the pen name Humphrey Plowjogger.
That's amazing.
Humphrey Plowjogger. This is
Really?
Tiger King, the porn version.
That's his porn name.
So was Humphrey Plowjogger actually A. Ben Franklin, B. John Adams, C. Thomas Jefferson, or D. Stephen Hopkins? So A. Franklin.
This is tough.
This is a tough
I
one.
haven't been right yet, so.
Who's some really
So nobody raise your hand when Laura
Yeah.
was.
I have no idea.
I'm just the director.
Okay, we got one for Franklin.
I could
Franklin.
see. I could see a lot of them.
I see the humor in his
Yeah.
choice there.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
So in addition to Poor Richard, you think he was Humphrey Plowjogger? Okay, any votes for Adams?
That's true.
Any votes for John Adams? Aww. Thomas Jefferson? I have to abstain courteously. Any votes for Hopkins? Humphrey Plowjogger was actually a very young John Adams.
Wow.
And he tried to be folksy. He wanted to be like a Poor Richard type, but I think he just picked a bad name.
Not
Clearly.
All right.
No,
Didn't talk to him for a
No.
week.
Question number 4. This is a little sad. Due to a hunting accident, this Continental Congress member wore a black silk handkerchief over his left hand, concealing his 4 missing fingers. Was it Stephen Hopkins?
Wait, I'm sorry. What was the accident?
It was a hunting accident. His gun exploded in his hand, actually.
Dick Cheney?
Like Cheney.
Okay,
See, this
so
he does
it
repeat.
left him with a pinky. Sadly,
I'm
yeah.
not a hunter, I'm a baker.
Okay, so was it A?
Surfer.
Was it A. Stephen Hopkins, B. Colonel Thomas McKean, C. Richard Henry Lee, or D. Caesar Rodney? Any votes for
He's
Hopkins?
a mess.
Yeah.
1 vote for Hopkins.
Probably would.
Any votes for Thomas McKean?
McCain?
McKean, not McKean. I'll vote for McCain.
I've got McCain on the brain.
Richard Henry Lee? Or Caesar Rodney? I love how everybody's like Rodney had cancer and stuff, so yeah, it had to be.
He's a mess.
was-
everywhere.
Believe it or not, it was Richard Henry Lee.
Yeah.
He had on his left hand, he had only 1 finger.
I'm gonna have to do something.
Nobody let Jess know.
We're gonna have to
No. Social lead.
Which finger was like?
Pinkly. Yeah.
I need
Well,
some
it's-
lead.
think about when you're holding the gun,
Yeah.
like everything that was in contact with the gun. Yeah.
So he had a thumb
Wait,
up.
so the pinky was left?
He shot himself
Oh.
with his
No, the gun exploded in his hand
Oh,
while
okay.
hunting. So, and apparently, furthermore, he, you know, you could
So
think
wait,
that
I
might
can
kind of
see
ruin your confidence as an orator. He would gesture with that hand. He would get it in your face. Apparently, I'd be like,
You need to do something with
So I'm
him.
thinking, holding it like this, you're gonna pull the trigger here. It has to be his left hand.
It was his left, yeah.
Dominated hand.
yeah. But,
But what, there's no pinkily in the music.
Pinkily. All right, question number 5.
We can change it.
I hope everybody's been keeping track of their points and who's got what.
Formally.
Why did we get a prize?
Maybe. We'll have to see.
His voice on your Hill Venture.
Juliana, we have the budget, right?
Right.
I have chewing gum out there. Number 5. This member of the Continental Congress would design the Great Seal of the United States after 3 committees, the first which was Franklin, Adams, and Jefferson, couldn't agree on the right look. So was the Great Seal, it's the flip side of your dollar bill, by the way, if you need to think about what the
Okay.
Great Seal is. Yeah. Who designed that? Was it A, Charles Thompson, B, Andrew McNair, C, Lewis Morris, or D, Dr. Lyman Hall?
Martha Jefferson would have done a better job.
I agree. I agree, dear. I agree. You were dead by then, though. Sorry. You were dead of childbirth by then.
You were buried. Sorry.
All right. So
Betsy already got the
So A, any votes for Charles Thompson, our secretary? B, any votes for? No, we got one. B, any votes for Andrew McNair, our custodian? Was he an artsy man? Secretly.
What did he do with those flies?
Okay, C, Lewis
He made a
Morris of New
collage out
York.
of them.
New York's going to represent New York. Okay.
We stick together.
Any
go with
votes
her.
for any votes for Dr. Lyman Hall?
Ooh.
Okay, so here's a fun one. It was Charles Thompson.
Wow.
Our congressional secretary designed the seal after 3 committees, and Adams, Jefferson, and Franklin couldn't agree on.
I mean,
law.
that's no surprise.
No, that's
No.
the other song. That's after the egg.
Yeah.
All right, so how are we doing on points? How many?
Joyce has probably got
Two.
I have 2.
I have 2.
I have the egg.
I eat the egg. All right, so then we do need a tiebreaker here. All right, so final question. Number 6. This member of the Continental Congress was an avid jogger. I don't know how that works with those shoes, but okay. He ascribed his excellent health to a lifelong ritual of bathing his feet in a bucket of ice water first thing every morning, even before breakfast. And then he went running, apparently. So, was this Dr. Josiah Bartlett of New Hampshire, Dr. Lyman Hall of Georgia, Richard Henry One Finger Lee? Now you're never going to look at Jazz the same way.
States.
Or D, Thomas Jefferson. Any votes for Bartlett of New Hampshire?
I'm gonna go with him.
He's a doctor. Any
And
votes
it's cold
for,
up there.
Any
We're
votes,
gonna get the guys.
any votes for B, Dr. Hall?
I'm going with Hall.
I am too.
Okay. Any votes for Lee?
Got one finger.
Maybe all he could do is jog now.
He wasn't doing push-ups, that's for sure. Or any votes for Jefferson?
I'm going to go with Jefferson because he was such a solitary. He didn't talk much.
Come here. You're right, it was Jefferson.
Wow.
Jefferson loved to go jogging in the morning for 2 miles, and then he would shove his feet in a bucket of cold water because he was just that weirdo.
Oh, I'm getting so many ideas for the full show.
So did that give you 3 points in the win?
They did.
Yes,
Thanks, you guys.
And you were gonna lead.
And I
See
was
that?
going to see that.
All right, so
Beginner's
now
luck.
the last thing we need is that plug segment to say when the
right.
show is. So I'm going to let you do that because I just talked a lot.
Which show?
This one.
Say yours.
No, 1776.
Oh.
You can't.
This show goes up. This 1776 show, in fact, goes up.
In fact.
August 24th, 25th, 26th, with 2 shows on the 25th. Is that right, Laura?
That is correct. We're going to be at Porchlight Theater in Glen Rock, and you can bring wine and beer while you're watching the show.
Or your bucket of ice.
Wrong. Bucket of ice.
Yes.
Or a very small manicure.
The world's quickest manicure. So that was a really fun conversation with some of our best buddies in Congress. And
we missed some people.
we did. No, we had a bunch of people that we extended the invitation to everybody, absolutely. So
Memorial Day weekend, though.
yeah, well, it happens, you know. Life, imagine that. People have lives outside of our show. I don't know why. How dare they? But if you want to check out, we're going to do all of our usual plugs, but to check out 1776, our production, the Women's Congress, we have a website, do we not? We have 1776.paquet.com. Now, I'll spell that for you. My husband and I have a company on the side, so we're hosting it on our server. But it's 1776.paquay.com, and we've got all the info you need to see the show, tickets, cast list, bios, like pictures, fun stuff. I have a blog that I run. Yeah, which some of this is going to show up there. So because that's the fun thing about recording these things. It works in 2 ways. But as always, thank you for joining us for Strange Deer. And I mean, we're just going to keep this lovely thing a-rolling. Where do they find us, Juliana?
You can find us on Instagram and Facebook and Tumblr and Twitter at
Strange Deer.
Strange
And if you want to reach out to us, you can always hashtag Strange Deer and we'll find you.
Or you can even email us at strangebuttruedeer@gmail.com. So this has been a lot of fun. Hey, look, the sun's starting to peek out. I'm excited.
Aww.
Fade this out, okay? Fade this.